Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're tackling a topic that, let's be honest, often carries a bit of a bad rap. Performance management and appraisal. For many, it's just that, yearly HR ritual we dread, or maybe a mountain of paperwork we just try to get through.
Right, the necessary evil sort of feeling.
Exactly. But what if I told you it's actually one of the most powerful strategic levers an organization has, assuming it's done right?
That's absolutely true. And it's fascinating how often performance appraisal gets kind of pigeonholed as just an administrative task instead of being seen as, a fundamental pillar of organizational health and strategic success. If we connect this to the bigger picture, a really solid approach to performance, that's the bedrock for everything. From nurturing individual talent all the way up to driving the entire company's mission forward, it's about so much more than just assigning a score once a year.
I completely agree. So our mission today is to really unpack the fundamental ideas behind it. We want to explore the various methods available, shine a light on those common pitfalls that trip up even the best intentions, and ultimately trace its evolution towards something more holistic.
Yeah.
A comprehensive, continuous performance management culture. This deep dive, we hope, is designed to be your shortcut, really, to being genuinely well-informed on this critical subject, whether you're maybe an MBA student gearing up for leadership, an HR professional looking to refine your practice, or maybe a general manager just striving to build a truly high-performing team.
Absolutely.
So let's kick things off right at the beginning. What are we actually talking about when we say performance appraisal?
Okay, so at its core, performance appraisal is a systematic process. That's the key word, systematic. It's about evaluating an employee's current and sometimes their past performance relative to a set of clearly defined standards.
Defined standards, okay.
Yeah, think of it as taking a structured, really intentional look at how an individual has delivered on what was expected of them. And those defined standards you mentioned, they are absolutely crucial here. They provide the objective framework. Because without them, any evaluation, it just quickly becomes subjective, prone to bias and frankly pretty unfair.
Right.
It's the difference between saying, hey, do a good job versus saying, achieve X sales target by Y date with Z customer satisfaction score. Much more concrete.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And why does this systematic process matter so much? Because as you said, it's not just a standalone event, is it? It serves multiple critical functions within an organization.
Yeah.
Way beyond just checking a box.
You're spot on. One of the most common and maybe the most immediate purposes, the one most people probably think of first, is for administrative decisions.
The paperwork side. Promotions, pay.
Exactly. Appraisals provide the objective data and the structured documentation needed to make those really crucial HR decisions. We're talking about promotions, salary adjustments, internal transfers, even sometimes, unfortunately, disciplinary actions or layoffs. Without a transparent and robust appraisal system, these high-stakes decisions can easily feel arbitrary or, based on who you know.
Favoritism, yeah.
Right, favoritism. And that can just quickly erode trust among employees and lead to a really demoralized workforce. So the data collected ensures a degree of fairness and, importantly, defensibility in these processes.
Okay, so it really underpins that fairness and creates a clear basis for those big career moves. But beyond the numbers and the paperwork, there's a deeply personal side too, isn't there? It's really about individual growth.
Oh, absolutely. That's another key purpose, and arguably the most impactful one for individual development. We're talking feedback and coaching.
Right.
This is where the developmental aspect truly comes alive. Appraisals offer that structured opportunity to give employees constructive feedback on their performance. And it's not just about pointing out what went wrong that's important, but it's also about highlighting their strengths, what they're really excelling at.
Yeah, recognizing the good stuff.
Exactly. And then guiding them on where and how they can improve. This feedback, it really empowers employees. It helps them understand precisely where they stand, what they're doing well, and what specific areas they need to focus on for growth. Think of it like a roadmap for their own learning and self-correction. It directly contributes to their professional maturity.
And that seems like a really natural flow then. Identifying areas for improvement makes it a perfect tool for pinpointing training needs, right? If you know where someone needs to get better, you can figure out how to help them get those skills.
Precisely. Appraisals are incredibly effective for identifying training needs. It's a direct link. When an employee's performance consistently falls short of a defined standard, or maybe when new skills are needed for future roles or because technology is changing,
which happens all the time,
constantly, the appraisal process can pinpoint those specific gaps with remarkable clarity. This insight then lets the organization tailor training and development programs directly to those needs, making sure employees get the necessary skills and knowledge to perform effectively and adapt. It's really a strategic investment in your human capital, keeping your workforce skilled, adaptable, competitive in this constantly changing world.
And finally, it feeds into the bigger picture of someone's long-term journey within the company. Career development planning. This feels like the most forward-looking purpose, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. That's a strategic long-term view. Appraisals contribute significantly to career development planning. By assessing an employee's current capabilities, understanding their aspirations, what do they want to do, and looking at the organization's future needs, appraisals become instrumental. They help map out a personalized professional growth path. This might involve identifying opportunities for advancement, maybe facilitating cross-functional experiences to broaden their skill set.
Get them exposed to different areas.
Exactly, or directing them towards specialized training that aligns with both their ambitions and the company's strategic direction. It's a powerful message to employees, really. It says the organization is genuinely invested in their future, and that's a huge driver of long-term engagement and retention.
So, tying this all together for our listeners, what does all this mean for you?
Right. Understanding these multifaceted purposes truly helps you leverage appraisals effectively in your own organization, whether you're the one conducting them as a manager or maybe designing the system as an HR professional, or even if you're on the receiving end as an employee.
Yeah.
Knowing the why behind it all, it transforms this process from, that dreaded obligation into a valuable strategic opportunity. It shifts from a have to do to maybe even a get to do.
I like that framing. Okay, that foundational understanding is absolutely crucial. Now let's unpack the three-step cycle that really underpins effective appraisals. Because it's not just a single annual event, is it? It's more like a continuous loop, starting with a really crucial foundational step that I think often gets overlooked.
You're absolutely right. That first step, and arguably the most critical foundation everything else is built on this, is setting work standards.
Okay.
This involves clearly defining the employee's job responsibilities and what successful performance actually looks like in concrete terms. It's just not enough to say, do a good job or be a team player.
Vague, right? What does that even mean?
Exactly. You need to specify what a good job entails, how being a team player manifests in behaviors you can actually see. This clarity ensures that both the employee and the manager are on precisely the same page about what needs to be achieved. It's about establishing clear, shared benchmarks, removing ambiguity, removing guesswork.
And part of setting those standards involves something we hear about a lot, but its real power is in how you apply it. SMART goals.
Absolutely. SMART goals are a huge part of setting effective standards, moving beyond just the broad job description. This acronym is just so critical because it transforms vague intentions into actionable, measurable targets. Let's quickly break it down. S is for specific. Goals need to be clear, concise, well-defined, no room for misinterpretation. Instead of improve customer satisfaction, too vague.
Right.
A specific goal is increase customer satisfaction survey scores by 5% in Q3. See the difference?
Much clearer. Measurable too, I guess.
Exactly. M is for measurable. You need a way to track progress and objectively know if the goal was met. This almost always involves numbers, metrics. How will you know when that 5% increase is achieved? What data points are you using? Then A is for achievable. The goal has to be realistic, attainable, given the employee's skills, the resources they have, the bigger picture. Setting impossible goals, that's just demotivating.
Sets them up to fail.
Precisely. It should be a stretch, yes, but not a break. R is for relevant. The goal has to align directly with their job role and contribute meaningfully to the team or the organization's objectives. Is it pertinent? Does it actually matter? Or is it just busy work?
Good question.
And finally, T is for timely. Every goal needs a deadline, a specific time frame. This creates urgency, helps prioritize, gives a target date. But here's a subtle point about SMART goals. They aren't just for clarity, they're kind of the antidote to the blame game. By creating these mutually agreed upon measurable targets, they establish mutual accountability, a shared reality of expectations. If employees don't know exactly what's expected, how can they possibly meet those expectations? And how can they be evaluated fairly?
Makes sense.
That lack of clarity leads to misaligned efforts, missed targets, and ultimately a breakdown of trust. So, setting SMART standards, it's the starting point for effective, fair performance management.
Okay, so once those crystal clear SMART standards are locked in place, the second step is all about observing and collecting information on how an employee is actually performing against those very standards. This feels like where the detective work begins.
Yeah.
How do we actually gather this data effectively and, importantly, objectively?
That's a crucial question, you're right. The second step is assessing performance. Systematically gathering data on how well the employee met those standards we just set. And this is far from just a manager's subjective gut feeling, or at least it shouldn't be.
Right.
It requires objective observation and really diligent data collection throughout the entire appraisal period, not just scrambling in the weeks leading up to the review.
Guilty as charged sometimes.
We've all been there. But ideally, this data needs to include both quantitative and qualitative metrics.
Okay, break that down. Quantitative versus qualitative.
Sure. Quantitative metrics are the easily measurable numbers. Think sales figures, production units, website traffic, error rates. If the standard was increase sales of product X by 10%, the sales figures directly tell you how well that standard was met. Pretty straightforward.
Got it.
But equally vital are the qualitative metrics. These are trickier. They might involve observations of, say, collaboration quality, how effective their communication is on cross-functional projects, their problem-solving skills when something unexpected happens.
How they do things, not just the what.
Exactly, or the nuanced quality of customer service interactions, things that are harder to put a number on but are no less important for a holistic view of performance. The key is to gather evidence that directly speaks to the employee's adherence to, or deviation from, the established standards. This continuous evidence-based data collection makes the eventual appraisal discussion much more robust, factual, and easier to defend. It moves beyond just subjective feelings.
And finally, after all that meticulous preparation, setting standards, gathering data, you actually sit down and talk about it. Step 3, providing feedback. This feels like the culmination, but also where the real transformative impact truly happens. This is the moment of truth, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Step 3 is providing feedback, typically through a structured discussion with the employee. This is the crucial conversation where the manager communicates the assessment. It's vital to highlight strengths and acknowledge achievements first. That builds rapport, makes the employee more receptive.
Start with the positive.
Generally, yes. But it's equally about pointing out specific areas for improvement. And always backing that up with those concrete examples gathered in Step 2. No vague criticisms. This is also the chance to reinforce the expectations set back in Step 1, and crucially, to collaborate on setting new developmental goals for the future. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, this feedback loop, this is precisely where the true developmental power of the entire cycle lies.
Right.
It's the moment the employee gains vital insight, understands where they can grow, and actively collaborates with the manager on a clear path forward. Honestly, without effective feedback, those first 2 steps, setting standards, assessing performance, they lose so much of their value. It's the essential bridge between just evaluating and actually developing someone, turning data into action.
Okay, that 3-step cycle provides a great framework. Now let's dive deep into the toolbox itself, because there isn't just one single one-size-fits-all approach to appraisals, right?
Right.
The specific method you choose can profoundly impact the outcome, shaping not just the results, but also the employee experience.
Absolutely. Different situations, different roles, different company cultures definitely call for different tools. Understanding the nuances of each method is really key to picking the most appropriate one for your context.
So where should we start? What's a really common one?
Let's start with probably the most ubiquitous, the graphic rating scale.
Yes, the 1 to 5 scale.
Pretty much. This method uses a numerical or maybe a descriptive scale to rate employees on various traits or job dimensions, things like job knowledge, quality of work, attendance, initiative, you name it. Like you said, it might be a 1 to 5 scale where 1 is poor and 5 is excellent. Or it might use phrases like needs improvement, meets expectations, exceeds expectations. Its main appeal, it's relatively easy to use and understand. Simple, quick, that's why it's popular.
But I sense a but coming.
There's always a but. The primary drawback is that it can suffer significantly from subjectivity if the criteria, what each rating point actually means, are explicitly clear. What one manager considers excellent job knowledge, another might only see as good. This leads to inconsistencies across the organization, makes objective comparisons really difficult.
Okay, so simplicity is good, but clarity is key there. What about methods that force more comparison between employees?
Right. There's the alternation ranking method. This one's particularly effective in smaller teams.
How does that work?
You list all the employees you're evaluating. Then you systematically choose the highest performer on a specific trait. or maybe overall performance. Then you pick the lowest performer, and then the next highest, and the next lowest, and so on.
Ah, alternating back and forth.
Exactly, alternating ends of the spectrum until everyone is ranked. It's quite straightforward for very small teams, say 5 to 10 people. The benefit is it forces managers to actually differentiate among their employees, helps avoid that everyone is average, central tendency bias we'll talk about later.
Look at the downside.
It quickly becomes cumbersome and just impractical to scale for larger groups. Imagine trying to rank 50 or 100 employees this way. The complexity explodes and the direct comparison loses its value.
Right. Doesn't scale well. Oh, building on that comparative idea, there's also the paired comparison method. Sounds even more intensive.
It is more intensive. The paired comparison method takes comparison a big step further. Here, each employee is compared directly to every other employee in pairs, one at a time.
Wow. Okay. Example.
Sure. If you have employees A, B, and C, you'd compare A to B, then A to C, and finally B to C. For each pair, the manager decides which employee is better on a specific trait or overall. The result is a final ranking based on the total number of wins each employee gets in these head-to-head matchups.
What's the benefit there?
Well, it can help reduce halo and leniency biases somewhat because managers are forced to make direct choices between two individuals.
But the downside must be the sheer number of comparisons.
Exactly. It generates a huge number of comparisons as the team size grows. The formula is n times n minus 1 divided by 2. So just for 10 employees, you're doing 45 separate comparisons. Very time-consuming.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of work. Okay, moving on to one that often sparks debate, but is certainly widely discussed, the forced distribution method.
Ah, yes, the forced curve. The forced distribution method requires managers to place predetermined percentages of employees into different performance categories. For instance, a common structure might be, say, 20% in the excellent category, 70% in average, and 10% in poor.
Often called rank and yank in some contexts, right?
That's the term often associated with it, famously linked to GE under Jack Welch, though many companies have used variations. The primary advantage is that it strongly encourages differentiation. It prevents managers from just rating everyone as average or, conversely, everyone as excellent. It forces those tough calls.
But the controversy comes from
the major drawback is that it can be perceived as highly unfair and incredibly demotivating, especially if a team genuinely does have a higher percentage of high performers than the curve allows.
Right. You might have a team of superstars, but still have to put some in the bottom category.
Exactly. It can foster unhealthy internal competition instead of collaboration, potentially leading to resentment, damage morale, and even cause talented people to leave. It needs very careful implementation, if used at all.
Definitely a tricky one. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Away from those comparative, almost quantitative methods to something more focused on qualitative documentation and concrete examples. The critical incident method.
This is a really interesting one. With the critical incident method, managers maintain an ongoing log, like a diary of specific, significant positive and negative incidents of employee behavior throughout the appraisal period.
So not just feelings, but actual events.
Precisely. These aren't vague impressions. They are concrete, observable examples of exceptional performance or areas needing improvement. For example, a critical incident for a project manager might be, on October 25th, Sarah proactively identified a critical budget overrun in Project Alpha before it escalated, presenting a clear solution to the team. That's a positive one.
And a negative example.
Maybe. On November 12th, John failed to respond to a critical client email within the 24-hour service level agreement despite multiple reminders. These detailed notes are then used during the appraisal discussion to provide concrete behavioral evidence.
What's the main advantage here?
What's fascinating is how this method shifts the focus from vague traits like is proactive to observable behaviors like identified a budget overrun. It provides strong evidence that can be discussed objectively. It also helps fight against recency bias, where managers only remember the last few weeks of performance. By keeping a log over time, you get a much more balanced view.
That makes sense. Then there are simpler, more narrative-driven forms of assessment.
Yes, those are generally called narrative forms. These are typically written assessments where managers describe an employee's past performance, achievements, areas needing development, often in free-form text.
Like writing an essay.
Kind of, yeah. They allow for rich, detailed, qualitative feedback and can be highly personalized. This open-ended format can capture nuances that a rating scale might totally miss.
That's the downside.
Their main drawback is they can be highly subjective, depending on the manager's writing skill and biases. And they're incredibly difficult to compare across employees or departments. How do you compare one manager's essay to another's?
Right. Consistency is a challenge.
A significant challenge. Makes it hard to ensure fairness or do any kind of aggregate analysis.
Okay, now, for something that really tries to combine the best of both worlds, blending the structure of a rating scale with the specificity of critical incidents, you mentioned behaviorally anchored rating scales, or BARs. Sounds sophisticated.
BARS is indeed a sophisticated method, and it's specifically designed to significantly improve objectivity and reduce those common rater errors we've touched on.
How does it achieve that?
Okay, imagine a rating scale. But instead of just checking good for, say, customer service, you're rating against concrete examples of what good or excellent customer service actually looks like in terms of behavior.
Give me an example. Sure.
Yeah, let's stick with customer service. A 5 rating, excellent, might be anchored by a specific behavior like employee proactively offered a solution to a customer's unspoken need, exceeding expectations and creating a wow moment.
Okay.
And a 1 rating, poor, might be anchored by employee was rude and dismissive when questioned by a customer, resulting in a direct, formal complaint. You see, BARS builds these specific, observable behaviors, the anchors directly into the scale itself for each point. This makes the ratings much more consistent and objective.
How do you even develop something like that? It sounds complex.
It is rigorous, but that rigor ensures its validity. The development process typically involves several detailed steps. First, you collect critical incidents. You get subject matter experts managers, high-performing employees, to provide lots of examples of both effective and ineffective performance related to specific job dimensions.
Like we discussed with the critical incident method.
Exactly, but now you're using them to build the scale. Second, these incidents are grouped into performance dimensions like customer focus, problem solving, technical skill. Third, you have other experts reallocate these incidents back into the dimensions to make sure everyone agrees on where they fit. It's a check for consistency.
Yeah.
Fourth, these experts then rate the effectiveness of each incident on a numerical scale, maybe 1 to 7, to assign scale values to the behaviors. Finally, the instrument is finalized. You select the most representative incidents, the ones with high agreement among experts, to serve as the official behavioral anchors at specific points along the rating scale for each dimension.
So what does this all mean in practice? Why go through all that effort?
BARS takes the guesswork out of ratings. It gives managers concrete, observable examples for each performance level. This significantly reduces subjectivity, promotes a shared understanding of what good performance looks like, and helps different raters apply the scale much more consistently, ultimately leading to fairer, more accurate appraisals.
And it sounds like BARS is very focused on how a job is done, the behaviors. What about a method that's purely focused on what gets achieved, the tangible results? I think you mentioned management by objectives, or MBO, earlier.
You've hit the key distinction perfectly. Management by objectives, MBO, is a fundamentally different philosophy. It's highly results-oriented.
How does it work?
Essentially, employees and managers jointly set clear, measurable goals for a specific period. These goals are usually cascaded down and aligned with broader organizational objectives, so individual work contributes to the big picture. The process involves regular reviews of progress towards these goals, often with ongoing coaching and support from the manager. The emphasis here is heavily on outcomes and achievements, rather than focusing on traits or specific behaviors used to get there. And this raises an important question for any organization using appraisals. Does your system prioritize what was achieved or how it was achieved? MBO leans heavily into the what.
So who is MBO best suited for?
It's incredibly effective for roles where quantifiable results are paramount and where employees have significant autonomy in how they achieve those results. Think sales roles, project management, senior leadership. It can also be very motivating because employees are directly involved in setting their own targets. That fosters a strong sense of ownership and accountability.
Makes sense. And finally, in today's world, we have to talk about technology. How have computerized and electronic appraisal tools changed the game?
Oh, dramatically. The advent of technology has streamlined and enhanced performance appraisals in huge ways, moving it from a, burdensome annual chore into potentially a more dynamic, continuous process.
What about the benefits?
Software platforms, whether they're part of a larger HRIS system or dedicated appraisal tools like Zing HR or FUCs, allow organizations to digitize the entire workflow. This brings loads of benefits. It enables highly customized forms tailored to specific roles. It can auto-generate reports providing quick analytics across teams. It allows easy integration of behavior-based metrics or competencies, like from BARS.
And tracking performance in real time.
Yes, that's electronic performance monitoring, or EPM. These tools can track real-time outputs automatically. Think number of calls handled by a customer service agent, lines of code written by a developer, tasks completed in a project management system. This provides a constant, objective stream of data that can inform performance discussions, not just relying on memory or logs.
So the connection to you, the listener, is pretty clear here.
Absolutely. Technology can significantly streamline and enhance the appraisal process. Moving beyond cumbersome paper forms, offering unprecedented data insights and efficiency, it allows for potentially more frequent feedback, more structured data collection, and a more data-driven approach. Ultimately, freeing up managers to focus more on the coaching conversation rather than just the paperwork.
Okay, we've explored a whole toolkit of methods. But even with the best tools and the clearest standards, human bias can creep in and really distort the appraisal process, undermining its fairness and effectiveness. It's like having a precision instrument, but then using it with a shaky hand, right? Let's talk about the common traps managers fall into.
This is such a critical area, because even the most perfectly designed system can be flawed by human judgment. It happens all the time. One of the most fundamental issues, which we touched on earlier when talking about standards, is simply having unclear standards.
Still number one.
It often is. If the rating criteria are vague or poorly defined, it leads directly to inconsistent evaluations. Without a shared understanding of what, say, meets expectations truly means for this role, different managers will apply different benchmarks. Leads to unfair comparisons, employee frustration. It's like asking someone to hit a target they can't quite see clearly.
Okay, makes sense. What about the more psychological biases, like the halo effect?
The notorious halo effect. This happens when a manager's really positive impression of an employee in one specific area, or maybe just one striking positive trait, unfairly influences all their other ratings, making them uniformly high.
Yeah.
Sure, if an employee is exceptionally charismatic and fantastic with clients, a manager might subconsciously rate them highly on everything else, too. Maybe project management, technical skills, even if those other skills are actually just average.
And the opposite can happen too, right?
Exactly. That's called the horn effect, where one negative trait or incident unfairly taints all the other perceptions, dragging all the ratings down.
Okay, halo and horns. What about the tendency to just play it safe, avoid the extremes, whether good or bad?
That's the central tendency error. It's the phenomenon where almost all ratings cluster right around the middle, the average point on the scale. Managers avoid giving really high or really low scores.
Why do they do that?
Several reasons. Maybe to avoid conflict. Maybe they don't want to seem like they're playing favorites. Or sometimes it's just a lack of confidence in truly differentiating performance levels. The consequence is that your true high performers and your true low performers aren't accurately identified. This makes the appraisal less useful for development, and it makes those crucial administrative decisions, promotions, raises much harder to justify based on merit.
Closely related to that, I imagine, is just being generally too tough or too easy.
Precisely. That's strictness or leniency. This refers to a manager's consistent tendency to rate everyone they manage either too harshly, that's strictness, or too leniently, regardless of the employee's actual performance. A strict manager might give mostly 3s on a 5-point scale, even to good performers. A lenient one might give mostly 5s, even to average ones. This makes it completely impossible to compare performance fairly across different managers or departments. The ratings become meaningless for comparison.
And then, of course, there's outright bias, which can unfortunately stem from many sources.
Yes, bias is a huge one. This refers to personal prejudices or stereotypes distorting the ratings. This can be conscious, deliberate bias, or more often unconscious bias.
Based on what kinds of factors?
It could be based on factors like age, gender, race, ethnicity, personal friendship or animosity. Even similarity people tend to rate people like themselves higher. It's a severe problem because it directly undermines fairness and equity in the workplace, and it can definitely lead to legal challenges.
And sometimes the pressure isn't even personal bias, but more systemic.
Right. You get political pressures. This is where ratings are manipulated consciously or subconsciously to serve personal agendas or navigate organizational politics rather than reflecting objective performance.
Like what?
Maybe inflating ratings to avoid losing a valued team member who's looking to transfer. Or maybe deflating ratings to justify a layoff decision that's already been made for other reasons, or to prevent someone seen as a rival from getting promoted. This completely compromises the integrity and trustworthiness of the entire appraisal process. It turns it into a political game rather than a genuine assessment of performance.
Wow, okay, that's a sobering list of potential pitfalls.
Oh.
So with all these potential errors lurking, what are the solutions? How can organizations not just identify, but actively minimize these errors and make appraisals truly more accurate and fair?
Thankfully, it's not hopeless. There are several effective strategies organizations can implement. First, and this links back to our methods discussion, especially bars, is to use behaviorally defined rating scales whenever possible.
Why did that help so much?
Because these scales reduce subjectivity by providing those concrete, observable examples of performance at each level, it leaves less room for individual interpretation or bias to creep in. It gives everyone a common, objective language for performance. Second, and this is absolutely crucial, organizations must train their raters effectively.
More than just how to fill out the form.
Oh, much more. This training shouldn't just be about the mechanics. It needs to cover recognizing and actively mitigating the various biases we just discussed: halo, central tendency, leniency, etc. It needs to ensure managers deeply understand the rating scale's nuances, how to gather objective evidence, and crucially, how to deliver constructive, actionable feedback effectively. Managers need to understand the why and how, not just the what's.
And relying on just one person's opinion can be risky too. Leveraging multiple perspectives seems like a good idea.
Absolutely. That's the third strategy: using multiple raters and 360-degree feedback when feasible and appropriate. 360-degree feedback involves gathering input not just from the direct supervisor, but also from peers, subordinates, sometimes even customers or clients if relevant.
How does that help with accuracy?
It provides a much more holistic and balanced view of an employee's performance. Individual biases, whether conscious or unconscious, tend to get diluted or cancel each other out when you have input from multiple viewpoints. It creates a richer, more complete picture. And finally, organizations should implement appraisal audits. This is often overlooked.
What does that involve?
It means periodically reviewing appraisal results across different departments or managers. You look for patterns. Does one manager consistently rate much higher or lower than others? Is there an unusual clustering in the middle? Audits can help flag managers who might need additional training or whose ratings consistently deviate from the organizational norm. It's a quality control check to ensure fairness and consistency across the whole organization.
So for you, the listener, understanding these errors and knowing these solutions.
It's a practical step you can take. Whether you're designing the system, managing people, or even just participating, advocating for these practices helps minimize errors in your own appraisal processes. It ensures they are perceived as fair, trustworthy, and genuinely helpful. It's really about building a culture of equity and accuracy.
Okay, now we get to what feels like the most critical moment in the entire process: the appraisal interview itself. This is where the rubber truly meets the road. It's not just about delivering a score or reading from a form. It's about dialogue, understanding, and development. This conversation is often the most impactful and sometimes, let's face it, the most challenging part of the whole cycle.
It truly is. That interview can either solidify trust and powerfully motivate an employee, or, if handled poorly, it can demotivate, create resentment, and really damage the manager-employee relationship. So, number one rule: preparation is absolutely key. Managers cannot just wing this.
What does good preparation look like?
It means thoroughly studying the appraisal form, reviewing all the data, the notes, the metrics gathered during that assessment phase, step 2. It's vital to have clear, specific examples of performance, ready to discuss both the positive achievements and the areas needing improvement. These should be drawn directly from their critical incident log or other performance tracking.
Why are specific examples so important here?
Because vague criticisms, "you need a better attitude" or "be more proactive," are unhelpful, they can feel arbitrary, and they often lead to defensiveness. Specific, factual examples provide concrete evidence that's much harder to dispute and much easier to learn from. Furthermore, managers should come prepared with specific, actionable suggestions for the employee's development and growth. This shows they've thought carefully about how to support the employee's future success. It signals partnership. This isn't just a critique session, it should feel like a collaborative planning session for the future.
And the approach to the interview itself probably needs to vary significantly depending on the employee's overall performance level, right? You wouldn't handle a top performer the same way as someone who's struggling.
Precisely. Understanding these different scenarios helps tailor the conversation effectively, ensuring it's productive for everyone involved. We can break it down into roughly 4 types. First, there's the satisfactory promotable interview. This is for your STARS employees consistently performing well, clearly showing potential for advancement.
That's the focus here.
The focus should be squarely on discussing growth opportunities, mapping out potential next steps in their career path, and figuring out how to leverage their existing strengths for future, maybe more challenging roles. This conversation should be highly motivational, strongly forward-looking. It's basically succession planning in action.
Okay, good scenario.
Yeah.
What about someone who's doing fine, but maybe not on the fast track?
Right. That's the satisfactory, not promotable interview. These are your solid, reliable employees who are meeting expectations in their current role, but perhaps aren't suited for, or maybe aren't even interested in, moving up to a higher level.
So what's the goal there?
The goal here is to acknowledge and maintain their current strong performance, definitely reinforce their value, then discuss development opportunities within their current role. How can they deepen their expertise? Or maybe explore lateral moves that could offer new challenges or skill diversification without a formal promotion. It's about keeping them engaged, valued, and effective right where they are.
Okay, now for the tougher ones. What if performance is below par, but you think they can improve?
That's the sensitive, unsatisfactory, correctable interview. This is for employees whose performance is currently below standards, but who you believe are capable of improving with the right support.
How do you approach that conversation?
This interview requires developing a very clear, measurable action plan. It needs specific coaching, dedicated support, and a defined timeline for improvement. The manager needs to communicate expectations absolutely clearly, offer necessary resources like extra training or maybe mentorship, and then mutually agree on measurable targets for progress. This usually involves more frequent check-ins after the main interview to monitor progress and provide ongoing support.
And the most difficult scenario?
The really tough one is the unsatisfactory, uncorrectable interview. This is for employees whose performance is consistently below standard despite previous coaching, support, and clear warnings. Or maybe they demonstrate a clear lack of capacity or willingness to improve.
What happens then?
This conversation, unfortunately, may lead to formal disciplinary action, or in some cases termination if improvement just isn't feasible or isn't achieved within a reasonable time frame. This conversation requires extremely careful documentation, strict adherence to company policy and legal guidelines, and almost always very close collaboration with HR.
Okay, those are very distinct scenarios. But across all of them, even the positive ones, what are some universal tips for making any appraisal interview a success, regardless of the specific outcome?
That's a great question. Regardless of the performance level, certain best practices consistently apply to make the conversation productive. First, always aim to provide balanced feedback. Where possible, highlight strengths and accomplishments before discussing areas for improvement. This helps the employee feel valued, it builds rapport, and it generally makes them more receptive to hearing constructive criticism. Second, as we keep saying, always use facts and specific examples. Draw them directly from your performance records, your critical incident log. Avoid vague generalizations like, you need to improve your attitude. Concrete examples make the feedback undeniable, actionable, and feel less like a personal attack. Third, and this is critically important, create a dialogue, not a monologue. Don't just talk at the employee. Encourage them to speak, ask questions, share their perspective, even challenge your observations respectfully. Listen actively, empathetically. It should be a two-way conversation. They need to feel heard and involved in their own development plan.
Makes sense. It's a discussion, not a lecture.
Exactly. And finally, mutually agree on clear, actionable development plans for the future. These plans need specifics. Agreed upon goals, clear timelines, identified resources, or support needed. Both parties should walk away knowing exactly what the next steps are. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture of these interviews, they are prime opportunities for building trust, fostering engagement, truly nurturing talent. Or, unfortunately, they can become moments that destroy trust and completely demotivate someone. A well-conducted interview strengthens that crucial manager-employee relationship and lays the foundation for continuous future performance.
Okay, let's broaden the lens again. Beyond just evaluation, how can appraisals actively foster employee engagement and motivation? It feels like they have the potential to be so much more than just a review, almost a strategic tool in themselves if used right.
They absolutely do. When performance appraisal isn't just an isolated HR process, but is strategically integrated into the fabric of the organization, it becomes an incredibly powerful engagement tool.
What are some key strategies to make that happen?
One key strategy is to explicitly link individual goals with broader strategic organizational goals. When employees can clearly see how their daily tasks, their individual contributions, their performance targets directly contribute to the company's overarching mission and vision, well, their work gains much greater purpose and meaning.
So it's not just about my job, but how my job impacts us as a whole.
Precisely. They see their efforts as part of something bigger. That dramatically boosts motivation, commitment, and crucially, their sense of engagement.
What else?
Another vital strategy is to offer continuous, ongoing feedback rather than just relying on the big annual review. Performance doesn't just happen once a year, right? So feedback shouldn't either.
Makes sense.
Regular check-ins, informal conversations, timely recognition of successes, immediate constructive course corrections. This creates a culture of continuous improvement. It also prevents surprises during the formal appraisal meeting. This makes the formal interview itself less stressful. It becomes more of a summary discussion and future planning session rather than a big reveal of problems from 6 months ago. This ongoing dialogue allows for timely support and reinforces good habits.
And that continuous feedback naturally leads to the need for continuous support, doesn't it? It's not just pointing things out.
Exactly. Companies that do this well proactively provide consistent coaching and support. Managers need to evolve from simply being evaluators to acting as true coaches, helping employees develop new skills, overcome challenges, unlock their potential. This involves active listening, providing resources, guiding employees toward solutions, not just dictating them. When employees feel genuinely supported in their growth, their commitment to the organization deepens significantly.
And rewards. Does recognition play a role?
Absolutely. A fundamental, sometimes overlooked strategy is to recognize and reward strong performance meaningfully. And this goes beyond just the annual salary review. It includes timely verbal praise, public recognition when appropriate, maybe opportunities for challenging assignments that stretch them, investments in professional development, special projects. When employees feel seen, appreciated, and genuinely valued for their contributions, their motivation and loyalty soar. It creates this really positive feedback loop for continued high performance.
This all sounds great in theory, but let's look at a real-world example of how this actually played out.
Yeah.
The Hotel Paris case study is often cited. What was their problem, and how did they use their appraisal system strategically to solve it?
Right. The Hotel Paris case is a classic because it illustrates this strategic link so well. They face a huge strategic challenge. In the very competitive luxury hospitality market, they urgently needed to transform themselves into a true service leader. That was the goal, their core problem. Their existing appraisal system was completely misaligned with this big strategic objective. It used those vague, generic traits we talked about, things like good attitude or team player.
Nice to have, but not very specific.
Exactly. While nice, they were subjective and didn't directly translate into the specific observable service behaviors that actually mattered for delivering 5-star guest experiences. They wanted top-tier service, but their appraisal system wasn't measuring the behaviors that create it.
So they had this grand strategic goal, but their HR system, specifically appraisals, wasn't actually helping them get there. It was just an exercise. What was their solution then? How did they bridge that gap?
Their solution involved a fundamental strategic shift in their appraisal philosophy. They got rid of those vague traits. Instead, they focused intensely on job-specific competencies directly related to excellent customer service.
Like what?
For a hotel, this meant defining competencies like prompt and accurate check-ins, demonstrating exceptional patience when handling guest complaints, meticulous attention to detail and reservation specifics, tangible, observable behaviors that directly impacted the guest experience. And crucially, they also integrated relevant key performance indicators, KPIs, into the appraisal system. Things like the percentage of error-free check-ins, average guest wait times at the front desk, guest satisfaction scores related to specific interactions, things they could objectively measure and tie directly to service quality.
So what did this all mean for Hotel Paris? How did this redesigned appraisal system actually impact their strategic goal of becoming a service leader? This is where it gets really insightful how a well-designed system can directly drive business strategy.
The outcome was incredibly powerful. It really demonstrated the strategic impact. By shifting to these specific job-related competencies and directly linking performance feedback with employee development, all tied to measurable KPIs, Hotel Paris fundamentally aligned its appraisal system with its strategic service goals. Now, employees understood precisely what behaviors and what results were expected to deliver superior service. The appraisals became a proactive tool.
How so?
They used it for reinforcing those desired behaviors, for systematically identifying skill gaps related to service, and for providing targeted training to close those gaps. This strategic integration meant that every appraisal conversation, every feedback session, was no longer just an HR formality. It was a direct contribution to the hotel's ambition of becoming a service leader. It transformed their appraisals from a mere administrative task into a dynamic, strategic lever for improving customer satisfaction, enhancing employee capabilities, and ultimately driving core business success.
That's a fantastic example of strategic alignment. Okay, we've talked extensively about appraisals, but you mentioned earlier that the most forward-thinking organizations are moving towards something even more encompassing, more dynamic. Performance management. It sounds like a subtle distinction, but you stressed it's actually a crucial evolution in how companies think about performance and people.
Indeed, it's a really important evolution. While performance appraisal is definitely a component, performance management is much broader, more holistic, and fundamentally a continuous concept.
Define it for us then. What is performance management?
It's best defined as a continuous, future-oriented process. Unlike traditional appraisals, which are often periodic, annual, semi-annual, and largely backward-looking, performance management involves ongoing goal setting, real-time performance tracking, and continuous integrated feedback. It's not saved up for one big meeting. It crucially includes proactive coaching and consistent support from managers, and it's all about clear, explicit alignment with the organization's broader strategic goals. Think of it as a holistic, integrated system designed to ensure employees are constantly growing and contributing optimally, driving a culture of high performance.
So if it's this comprehensive system, what are the key differences then between what we've traditionally called appraisal and this more evolved performance management approach? It sounds like more than just changing the name.
Oh, much more. There are several critical distinctions that really highlight this evolution. First, think about frequency. Performance management is inherently ongoing versus periodic. Traditional appraisals are often those set-piece annual or semi-annual events. Sometimes they feel like Judgment Day. Right. Performance management, however, fosters a continuous dialogue. Check-ins, feedback, goal adjustments happen much more frequently, daily, weekly, monthly, woven into the normal workflow, not just saved up.
Okay, ongoing versus periodic. What else?
Second, consider the focus. It's profoundly forward-looking versus backward-looking. Traditional appraisals primarily review past performance. They act like a historical report card. Here's what you did last year. Performance management, while acknowledging the past, is heavily oriented towards future development, growth, and how to continuously improve moving forward. The key question is, what can we do now to get better to achieve our future goals?
And the overall feeling or purpose?
That's the third distinction. Its core nature is fundamentally developmental versus judgmental. Appraisals, especially badly handled ones, can feel like a one-sided evaluation where the employee is being judged, maybe even criticized. Performance management aims to be about fostering continuous growth, providing consistent support, collaborating on enhancing capabilities, and overcoming challenges. The manager ideally shifts from being primarily a judge to being a coach, a mentor, a facilitator of growth.
That sounds like a much more positive and productive approach. What are the broader strategic benefits for an organization that successfully makes this shift from just doing appraisals to embracing full-blown, continuous performance management?
The benefits are substantial, really reaching across the entire organization. For one, it significantly builds accountability within the workforce.
How so?
When goals are continuously discussed, progress is tracked more visibly, and feedback is ongoing and immediate. Employees have a much clearer understanding of their responsibilities and how they're doing against them. This fosters a stronger sense of ownership, personal responsibility for outcomes.
Okay, accountability. What else?
Secondly, it drastically improves employee engagement. This is huge. When employees get consistent, timely feedback, feel genuinely supported through coaching, and clearly see that connection between their daily work and the big organizational goals, well, they are far more likely to feel valued, motivated, and deeply committed.
And that leads to?
Higher morale, increased productivity, and significantly better retention rates. People want to stay where they feel supported and see their contribution matters. Finally, and perhaps most strategically, performance management directly helps with the strategic execution of business objectives. By continuously aligning individual and team efforts with those high-level strategic goals, organizations ensure everyone is pulling in the same direction, contributing effectively and efficiently. It creates that direct line of sight between daily work and top-line strategy.
Let's look at another real-world example to make this concrete. The Sweetwater U case study. This wasn't a hotel, but a university setting. What specific challenge did they face with their appraisal system, and how did they overcome it to build a more effective approach, moving towards performance management?
Right. Sweetwater U, a prominent university, faced a very common yet incredibly frustrating problem, particularly with their administrative staff. Appraisals, think secretaries, administrative assistants, they suffered from profound, inconsistent appraisals across different departments. Highly variable, very unfair.
What was causing the inconsistency?
It was partly due to the use of vague, poorly structured appraisal forms like we discussed before, leaving too much room for subjective interpretation. But crucially, it was also compounded by significant political influence creeping into the ratings. This was a major issue.
What kind of political influence?
Managers might inflate ratings for popular employees, or maybe for those they wanted to protect or keep happy. Conversely, they might deflate ratings for those they perhaps wanted to push out of their department or didn't personally like. The ratings weren't purely about performance. This made the entire system feel unfair, unreliable, and ultimately pretty ineffective for actually managing performance or making fair decisions.
That sounds like a really toxic and demotivating situation for everyone involved, especially the staff being appraised. How did they manage to turn such a deeply ingrained problem around? What was their solution?
Their solution was multifaceted, which is often necessary for systemic problems. It demonstrated a real shift towards a performance management mindset and directly addressed those core issues. First, they implemented structured appraisal forms, much more objective, much more consistent, reducing the ambiguity that allowed for political manipulation. These new forms likely included clearer behavioral anchors or specific performance metrics relevant to the roles. Second, they invested in comprehensive training for the raters, the managers.
Again, more than just filling out the form.
Absolutely. This wasn't just a quick webinar. It was robust training, teaching managers not just how to fill out the new forms, but crucially, how to accurately assess performance, understand the nuances of the rating scales, and rigorously recognize and actively avoid those common biases and political pressures.
Okay, better forms, better training. Was there anything else?
Yes, and this was perhaps the most impactful and innovative step, really signaling that shift towards performance management. They made the decision to decouple salary decisions from the appraisal discussion itself.
Separate the performance conversation from the pay conversation.
Yeah.
Why was that a game changer?
Because by separating the performance discussion, which could now focus purely on development, feedback, goal setting from the immediate financial reward, the salary increase, they drastically reduced the political pressure on managers to manipulate ratings purely for salary outcomes.
Took the money off the table during the feedback part.
Exactly. It allowed the appraisal conversations to become genuine discussions about performance, growth, and development, rather than potentially becoming negotiations over pay based on potentially biased ratings. And this raises an important question for you, the listener, reflecting on your own organization. Are your appraisals truly about performance and development? Or are they maybe weighed down by other agendas, like salary justification, that dilute their true purpose and effectiveness? Sweetwater U showed that sometimes systemic changes like decoupling pay, not just quick fixes, are necessary to restore integrity to the process.
That Sweetwater U example really drives home the point that the entire system needs to be designed thoughtfully to support its true purpose, fostering growth, ensuring fairness, and driving strategy. This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. We've covered so much ground, so let's try to distill it down. What does this all mean for us, the listeners? Let's quickly recap the key takeaways from our comprehensive discussion on performance management and appraisal.
Absolutely. We've journeyed from the basics right through to the strategic evolution, highlighting just how crucial this function is when it's done well.
Okay, takeaway number one. First and foremost, you absolutely must define clear, unambiguous standards for performance, whether that's through detailed job responsibilities, clear competencies, or those precise SMART goals. Clarity is the bedrock. Without it, the whole structure is shaky.
Takeaway number two, make informed strategic choices. Choose the right appraisal method for your specific context and culture. There's no single best way. Graphic scales are easy, BARS offers precision, MBO focuses on results, critical incidents give evidence. Understand your needs, the roles, your goals, and pick the tool that fits. Don't just default to what's always been done.
Third, be vigilant and proactive. Actively work to identify and avoid those common rating errors. Halo, horns, central tendency, leniency, bias, political pressures, they're real, they happen. Train your raters rigorously, use multiple perspectives like 360 feedback where it makes sense, and consider appraisal audits for quality control. Fight the bias.
Fourth, remember the crucial conversation. Use appraisal interviews as powerful coaching and guiding sessions. They are not just score deliveries. They are pivotal opportunities for real dialogue, development, and building trust. Prepare well, make it a two-way street, focus on being constructive.
And finally, the big picture goal. Aspire to the next level. Strive to evolve from a periodic appraisal system into a continuous performance management approach. This means shifting towards ongoing goal setting, real-time feedback, consistent coaching. Cultivate a cycle of development and alignment, not just a yearly check-in. So what does all of this mean? Performance appraisal isn't just a checkbox activity, is it? It's a dynamic, strategic lever for organizational success. When done right, it profoundly fosters engagement, drives accountability, cultivates talent, and aligns individual efforts seamlessly with the big business goals.
And that leads us to a final thought, perhaps a provocative question for you, the listener, to take away and reflect on. As you think about your own team, your own organization, how might shifting your perspective, moving from just doing periodic appraisals to actively managing performance continuously, how might that truly transform your team's engagement, accelerate individual growth, and ultimately significantly impact your organization's strategic outcomes? Consider the profound ripple effect that kind of cultural and systemic shift could really have.